Hi guys, it's Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network, coming to you for yet another one of our ongoing regular Sunday sessions. And today we've got a special topic: improving cash flow on retained assets, and more importantly, making the stock that you're going to sell more attractive to the final purchaser. Now, in order to do that today, I've got a very special guest. So George Kafantaris from Mosaic Property Group. So George, if you'd like to say hello to your audience, mate.
Yeah, hi Rob, hi everybody, and thank you for the opportunity.
No worries, mate. First, before we get too far into the topic of today, I thought it might be worthwhile to, tell everyone a little bit about yourselves, Mosaic Property Group, where you come from. We've got a national audience, and Mosaic are fairly well known in the southeast Queensland region, but for the rest of Australia, who are Mosaic Property Group?
Yeah, Rob, Mosaic started about 8 years ago under the current form, and over the last 8 years, we've become Queensland's most recognised private developer. And we have an end-to-end solution where we start from the research, the acquisition, the construction side, the design side, the interior design, and then we sell all of our product to either investors or owner-occupiers. And as importantly, or more importantly, we also look after all of the managements and the caretaking for a minimum of the first 25 years.
And that's really where, I guess, your role comes in as property manager for, I guess, that arm of the business taking over the finished stock at the end. So you started looking after just your own stock, as I understand it, and now you're looking after, I guess, almost any product anywhere in Southeast Queensland. Is that how I understand that?
Yeah, it's correct. So when we started off, we only looked after the product that we built because we wanted to make sure that the user ended up having the same level of service, and for us to have the same level of accountability, whether it's the management side or the build side. And then as time progressed, we started getting a lot of requests for our services to be used for products that in fact we didn't build. And for the first couple of years, we actually said no. And then the requests from our landlords, the requests from our referral partners kept on asking us to do it. And the only way we decided to do it is if we never ever discriminated against a product that we built and a product that we didn't build. So we're currently servicing from the Gold Coast to Brisbane, west out to Ipswich, and up to the sunny coast. And we've got just over 1,000 properties under management.
Which is a fairly substantial portfolio for any property management company. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess which leads us to the topic of today, which is, I guess, how we can, as I guess both investors and developers ourselves, how we can actually improve our cash flow for the products that we want to keep for ourselves, and also I guess the finished product that somebody's actually buying for us, and hence your expertise in that realm. Now, I guess for many of our people in our community, they will start out as property investors and typically deal with a property manager to start with. Then they turn their hand into, I guess, property developers, and they forget that as a property developer, your ultimate goal is to actually still be an investor and maintain and keep some of your assets at the end for cash flow. And I guess with that in mind, the stock that we're keeping and any stock that we're selling, we want to make that as attractive as we can. So hence today's topic.
Would you like me to start off from the investor side first?
Why not? Let's start there.
All right, from the investor side, so you can imagine the amount of investors we've got, and we've got the absolute first timers who have read about, have heard about, have been encouraged to invest in a property, to people who own quite a substantial portfolio. You've got the people that are very analytical, and you've got the people who actually don't want to hear from you. So we hear all sorts. So from the investor, in order to increase their cash flow, the most common way the initial investor believes we can increase the cash flow is just by reducing our fees, right? And we'll talk about fees a little bit later on. But there's a number of elements. So we want to keep it simple. You want to maximize the rent. So at all stages, unless the property is leased, there's no income coming in. So, and then the question arises, how do you maximize the rent? How do you ensure that you have the most coverage each time you go to lease a property, whether it's brand new or whether it's a relet situation? You want to make sure that you decrease any vacancy period So for how long the property is leased for. So if it's even if it's a brand new property and you're about to do the handover, how can you get somebody in there paying your rent as quickly as possible for the maximum price? You start looking at arrears. So once you have the tenant in there, how do you make sure they're paying your rent? And then from the property management side, I always ask our landlords, how often, and I use my words very carefully, Rob, how often do you have your rent dispersed to you? And the most common response we get is monthly in arrears, where we disperse weekly. So you look at those four levers, it's very, very easy to maximize yield.
Yeah, and you touched on it before, George, that most of us are, I guess, very conscious of cost, but we tend to forget that there's cost, value, and worth.
Correct.
And cost is what you pay, value is what you get, and worth is then what you can do with that. I guess what you're touching on is to say, well, let's not worry too much about the cost side of things. Cost is always important, but we want to say what value can we add and how can we use that to allow you to, I guess, maximize that cash flow and then use that in turn to, I guess, amplify your outcomes at the other end.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, fees are a very important thing. And especially when you've got investors who've got multiple properties in different states, all the states charge different fees. And the most common question is, what are your management fees? But what people don't understand is that someone can charge you a slightly lesser fee, be it 1% or 0.5% plus GST. But there's so many other on costs that they can charge you, which even if the service and the rent was the same, a cheaper fee structure can end up costing you more, right? But then it's nothing compared to, you know, getting a $5 a week increase when you could have got a $50 a week increase.
So you said what the worst question they ask is how much are your fees? What's the best question they could ask?
Look, the best question they can ask is, what service am I getting for those fees, right? So even when and I asked, when a lot of you've got to be cheeky sometimes, and sometimes landlords go, look, can I negotiate? And I said, look, I'm very happy to charge you more, right? And they don't. And when you start asking what services are they getting from maybe one of your competitors, sadly they don't know, right? And even little things, Rob, where, you know, a lot of property managers don't, where they can, charge the allowable water consumption to the tenant, and they don't. So a lot of landlords get hooked up on, look, I want to reduce your fees by 0.5% or 1%, which could be only $3 to $4 a week, which is still adds up, don't get me wrong. But when you add all of the other items that you can add from the property management side, it's so much easier to go, tell me about the service. But I think the problem that we face as an industry is that none of this is actually taught. So transparency into our industry is really not there.
And you touched on it, the fees that people are haggling are, I guess, when you look at a pure cost item, we're talking like dollars and cents. We're not talking huge amounts of in the outlay for, I guess, the management fees. But I guess if that lack of service because that property manager doesn't have the funds to resource well, that might mean 1 week that you don't have rent, or that might mean that when you go out to market, that you're not getting the maximum return, and all sorts of things like that. So, you know, that $2 or $3 here can add up very, very substantially at the other end.
Oh, absolutely. And even things like advertising, right? So we do a lot, we advertise on about 7 different portals, but the main 2 portals is domain.com.au and realestate.com.au. And what most investors don't realize is that realestate.com.au has 4 different layers of advertising. Now, all of our advertising is on what they call a Premier All service. So we will always be on page 1 of the search engine. And our photos are larger. Everything we do is just so much, we're in your face. So tenants know we exist, right? Where some landlords go, well, I can get it for free. Well, I can get it for free as well, but you're going to be on page 12 or 13 of the search engines. And exactly what you just said, All of a sudden, if you're on 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later of getting a tenant, because you're trying to save a couple of dollars worth of advertising, but you're missing out on $500 a week in rent coming into you, it doesn't make sense. Yep. Even with, instead of, most people don't realize they can negotiate their bank loans by a couple of points and the huge costs. So when we disperse your rent on a weekly basis, because your interest is calculated on your minimum daily balance, not your minimum monthly balance, the amount of interest that you can save over time, because we disperse money to you quicker, it all adds up.
Einstein was quite famous for this particular expression, and most people don't realize it, but one of the best formulas on the face of the planet is compounding interest.
Compound interest.
Compound interest. And I guess what you're saying is, well, we're using that to our advantage and pay that off much, much quicker. So, mate, so what are some of the services that they should expect from their property manager?
No, absolutely. So most landlords think all you do is collect rent, right? So collecting rent obviously is, without rent, nobody gets paid. And being a commission-only business, we've got a selfish interest to maximise your rent as well. So it's not just about collecting the rent, it's making sure that you've got the best suitable tenant in there. So you say, okay, how do you find that tenant? When you find that tenant, what sort of background do you do? What sort of background checks do you do on them? But even when you find the tenant, we will do servicing. Like even today, you and I were speaking off air that this morning, my team and I were on the Sunshine Coast doing leasing inspections. On a Sunday morning, we had over 35 groups come through at 9 a.m, where most inspections are done twice, possibly 3 times a week, where we've got a 7-day-a-week inspection team. We've got a designated leasing team, right? So we want to get the best tenant in there, paying the highest rent in the shortest time frame, so you as the landlord can start being paid. So once you have the rent collection, then there's a whole range of things, and these aren't in any order. You've got to make sure that all the routine inspections are being performed. So whether it's 3 times a year or 4 times a year, depending on what you're paying for, a property manager should go in there into your property and do a very, very intense colour inspection, so you know what's happening at every time with your property. We should be doing paying your bills on your behalf. So we should be paying your rates, your insurance, your body corporate if you have any, your smoke alarms, and the list goes on, your maintenance. Because when you pay a bill on someone's behalf, all that information collates. And at the end of the year, when you get your end of year statement, all of those costs are already there, where you could go independently to your accountant, they'll probably charge you $150 an hour to charge items for you. I always say to landlords, let us pay your water rates. Actually, we want to pay all the bills for them. And we don't charge anything extra to pay your bills. But when you have got the property manager paying your bills, we can then see consistency. Because my background is also as a chartered accountant. So I understand numbers. We want to make sure that there's no arrears on your property. So we've got over 1,000 properties under management. At the moment, we are running at 0% vacancy, and we are running at 0% arrears. But that only comes with intense scrutiny on a daily basis. But then you've got to use the best software that all integrates with the trust account. I think one of the most important things a property manager should do for their landlords is be available. So we hear too many times where I've rung them, I've emailed them, I've SMS'd them, and I get no response, or I don't even know who my property manager is. And one of the things that we do differently is that I, as the principal of the business, every landlord gets onboarded through me, right? Unfortunately, Rob, as well, the industry has got low barriers to entry, and most of the property managers, a lot of property managers don't see it as a career choice, where we do a lot of training for our PMs, our property managers, even so much so, we're going to ask you questions. Do you have a quantity surveyor's report? Which is all your depreciation. And then, is it a good one? Which a landlord can't answer that, of course. So we want to make sure that we understand all of the cost factors that can affect your yield.
And we touched on this when we spoke the other day, that sometimes when you look at a QS report, sometimes I guess the detail in that QS report can mean thousands of dollars difference in what your claimable assets are at tax time. And so you guys, I guess, work with your quantity surveyors and say, well, we've got 1,000 keys. There's lots of work that we can push your way. We need to make sure we're maximising those returns.
Absolutely. And you can imagine that the tax returns, the quantity surveys reports, the depreciation reports, they can charge from 200 to 700, right? Some are only for a 10-year period. Some are for is the life of the asset, right? And we've seen it because we're builders where we've had two different quantity surveyors go into two identical properties, and we actually test them. We should get on a brand new build, 2 or 3 quantity surveys. Guys, go out and give us the reports. And when you see the reports in front of you, the price of the report becomes so secondary when you realise an investor may be missing out on thousands of dollars a year, but they've gone for the cheaper option, thinking that every response they're going to get is the same, but it's not.
And you've got the inside knowledge because you guys have built that particular structure. So you know the actual cost.
Correct.
And you look at 2 different reports and you go, the variance between all of that is just crazy. So that it's dollar rich and pound poor, or sorry, penny wise and pound poor, I think it's the expression. So
you're correct.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that we're spending the right money on the right resources to get you the maximum return. So
absolutely.
Now we talked about I guess incoming tenants into the property in the first place, but I guess turnover of tenants and I guess planning for that or even retaining tenants. What can you tell us in that regard, George?
Look, that's a great comment and question as well, because not all tenants stay in the same property. And some of it is because the property is not to their satisfaction when what they thought, because some landlords don't want to do maintenance, right? So the tenants do have rights. A lot of it is the tenant's personal circumstances have changed. So what we see is that there's a lot of vacancies longer than it ever should have. So when we know the lease is about to expire, so we work 3 to 4 months in advance. So when we know the lease is about to expire, about 2.5 months, 10 weeks, we go to the landlord first and we ask them what is their intent with the property. Now, the majority say we're keeping it, we want to release. But there are other situations where there's been financial hardship, maybe there's been a divorce and the property needs to be sold. So they don't want you to release that property. But that's the absolute minority. But they say to us, we want to make sure that you can re-rent it, and preferably to the same tenant. Because if it's to the same tenant, there's no vacancy in the middle, right? There's no vacancy, there's no advertising cost, there's no cleaning cost, all of that has been evaporated. We then go to the tenant and we ask the tenant so about 8 weeks out now, we go to the tenant and we ask them what their intentions are. And they've got a predetermined time frame where they can respond. If they do not respond to us, we go back to them, and not just by, too many people are relying on software. We will also call them, pick up the phone, see what their intentions are, right? Maybe they haven't spoken to their partner or their spouse. And if they wish to stay, we let them know what the new prescribed rent is going to be. And it's not one of these automatic $5 a week. Now, a lot of the tenants are becoming a lot smarter, because there's so many tenants who also own investment properties that they also know what else is being rented in the area, but they also know the cost of moving, right? So they know it's going to cost them time and money, and and then bonds getting into the new place and cleans getting out of the old place, and they don't want to pay overlap rent. So if they're going to stay, we determine what the new rent's going to be. And up the Sunny Coast at the moment, where things are just going silly, we've had some rents increase by $100 to $150 a week.
Wow.
Right? Which is, and that's on a $600 base. So it's gone from $600 to $750. We've had $100 a week increases in Brisbane, in the last month, right? And, you know, so that's where if someone had increased, going back to the previous conversation, the rent by $5 a week, but they were 1% cheaper on fees, the landlord's lost out, right? Now, if the tenant has not come back to us, and or if we've rung them and they still can't give us an answer, we're going to actually ask them to leave, because we don't want them to tell us that they're going to leave with 1 week or 2 weeks to go. So within about 5 weeks before the end of lease date, we've already got the property advertised, and we will show the landlord all the research we've done on why we're asking for this particular rent. And also, when you've got lead time of 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, you can be cheeky on the rent asking price. Because, and if you're going a little bit higher, now let's not forget, property investing is a business. So, but I'm reading here, there's an email that I got this, you know, while I was waiting to come online, where a landlord, because they're living in fear, doesn't want us to increase any rent and just sign a new 12-month lease. That's their choice ultimately, but it depends on what business you're in, right? And then if we've advertised the property 6 weeks out, 5 weeks out, the inspections already started. We've got minimum of 3 scheduled inspections and unlimited private inspections. So, and if that means Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, it means Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And then we will try and sign the lease and then have absolute minimum of vacancy in the middle. But you need time though, because the existing tenant needs to get out. We need to do an exit. They need to do an exit. They've got a couple of days to get back, right? And then you've got all the people moving in. So it works like clockwork if done properly.
Yeah, if done properly.
Correct.
Hey, mate, there was a question that I meant to ask before and forgot to, so forgive me for looping it back around, but where you were talking about the bills being paid, because you guys are paying so many bills on behalf of so many people, you're seeing where the bills are coming up and where they're due, so you're able to manage that cash flow nice and easily on behalf of the owner.
Yep.
And also you're going to know what is, a fair and reasonable expense for that and be able to compare that against comparable properties. So what are some insights you've seen in that realm?
Look, the scariest one is we took over a whole block of units, 16 units down Surfers Paradise. And this one was just I just felt so sad for the current owner. So they bought the block of units, 16 of them, sight unseen, the whole lot. And the property manager that they went to, and because they were on one owner bought them, they weren't strata titled, right? So the property manager that had them told the owner that because they weren't strata titled, they couldn't get landlord's insurance, right? That was the furthest thing from the truth. And the amount of money that they lost and damages and everything else. So when we got the property, there was a 30-day handover period. We got the landlord's insurance put in place for them before we even took it over. Then the building insurance, they were paying $31,000 a year for the whole building and all the liability and the lifts and everything else. And because we've got 52 other buildings to compare that against, and we're very friendly with all the body corporate managers as well, we just thought this is ridiculous. And because of the size of our group, we know a lot of insurance brokers. We went and got that insured for $16,000. So it was $16,000 compared to $31,000. And we got them landlord's insurance, where they were told previously they could never, ever get landlord's insurance. And you sit here and you just go, I don't believe that people get away with this. I really don't. But a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And what I found in this industry is that landlords are extremely loyal. So they could have a bad service with someone and they stay with them. They don't realize there's options, or in fact, how easy it is to swap managements over.
Yeah.
Sorry, while we're talking about swapping managements, a lot of landlords think it's the best time to swap managements towards the end of the lease. It's the worst time.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the lease, you're trying to sign up either a new tenant or the same tenant. And if the exiting property manager knows they've lost that management, they've got they're not interested. They've got no focus.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that several times with, I guess, my own community. As you know, we've got about 11,000 people in that community. I've seen many people burnt by going through that experience, because the outgoing property manager, at that point, they don't care about chasing bonds. They don't care about, I guess, the condition of the property. Like they've checked out. Yeah, you want to keep them, I guess, as tight as possible for as long as possible. Yeah.
It's
So
also very.
it's a fantastic time to do that transition. That's the case, George.
The minute you're upset, the minute you've got a reason not to be with a property manager anymore, and you've given the property manager a fair chance. So because every landlord has got my mobile, if they ring me now, it's impossible for me to be over every phone call, every email that my team, we've got a team of 20 just on the property management side. So if I get a phone call from a landlord, and one of the other things that I do differently, or we do differently here in this business, is that when we send out our weekly statements to the landlords, it's from my personal email address. So if a landlord doesn't understand something or they want to ask a question, it's just reply. It's not accounts at, or it's admin at. It's George K at. So they can press reply and they've got straight access to me, right? So if a landlord rings me and I don't know the answer, because I'm not over the email or the phone call they're talking about, you take it, you thank them for letting you know, you commit to getting back to them in, could be half a day, 4 hours, depending on what's on my plate, and everyone is happy because we always get to the answer. Could be misunderstanding. We've also had landlords, Rob, where the two partners mightn't have spoken to each other. So we've spoken to the husband, but the wife didn't know, or vice versa, and there's been some miscommunication on their side. But if you're genuinely not happy, pull the plug. If you've got a Form 6 here in Queensland, normally it's a 30-day notice period. If you've got the older forms called the PAMD 22, it's normally 90 days, but it can be negotiated on both sides.
So we've talked a lot about, I guess, the how to bring people in, how to look after them, I guess, in transition, that sort of thing. I guess, sorry, I've lost my question there, mate. Sorry. When we're talking about trying to sell finished products, so we've got a lot of people that are property developers, and they're getting it to go to market. They're wanting to sell a finished product. How and when is a good time to engage with a property manager to say, we want to stick this out there? Because firstly, we've got to pick who we're creating our stock for. So is it an owner occupier? Is it an investor? And when it's an investor, how early do you guys recommend being engaged in the process? Is it right at the very start when we're speccing out the project and saying, look, the fixtures and finishes at this point, what's going to work well in the market? Or is it right at the very end after it's already sold? And so when's a good time, mate?
Mate, perfect question, right? Because now we're transitioning from the clients being investors to being developers, and they're selling their stock, right? So we've got the luxury, right, of having as I said before, over 1,000 properties under management, where we continually survey the tenants. So if you look at the original buildings that Mosaic built back in 2014, compared to what we're building today, they don't look the same. They don't, the sizes are different, the fixtures are different, the amenities are different. So we do a post-mortem on every single property to see what the tenants like, or what they would have preferred being something different in the building. So if you've got a property manager that does have the knowledge, and I'm not being disrespectful because we've all got different knowledge, of knowing what residents, so a resident can be an owner-occupier, it can be a tenant, and what they're after. So if the money allows, and in the area you're building, if you're building to owner-occupier standard, then you've got the market totally covered. And you can also charge the higher rents. So I would engage with a property manager at the same time you're engaging with your architect, because the architect designs these things, but they've never lived in them. They've never gone from a 2D to a 3D project. So we even look at things that And if you're building an apartment or a house or a townhouse or a duplex, and you go, okay, here's the front door. I've got a huge fridge cavity in the kitchen, but I can't get the fridge into the cavity through the door without scraping our fingers or removing all the, the side bits. And you start looking at what is it that residents want, right? And they do want the larger fridge cavities. Are you going to go for a 600 or a 900 mil appliance? Are you going to go for gas? Are you going to go for water? If you ask if I ask my wife what she likes about a property, it's different to what I like, right? When she likes the absolute clean glass cooktop, because it's so much easier to clean than getting your scour around all the gas stuff, right? When you're building your fridge cavity, do you actually have plumbing there? Because a lot of the fridges now have got ice makers and water. Where's the storage, right? So is there storage inside the property? Is there storage in the garage, right? So you can ask the questions from the PM side the same way you'd ask it from the architects about, well, I want to build this thing, but am I going to get criticised for what I've built once people start walking through it? And you need a thick skin in this game. On the PM side, if you're looking at selling it to an investor, or you want to have best of both worlds, you give the plans to the property manager so they can give you a accurate projected rental appraisal for the end user, the landlord, because you might be selling it to another investor. So what we would do is do all the mathematics for the builder, your clients, and you go, okay, here is the rental appraisal. Now, a lot of developers and a lot of sales agents will over-exaggerate the projected rentals because the higher the yield, people think it's a higher return, better outcome. But you need to get that rent. We would do a marketing pack. We would do a quantity surveyor's report, and in some cases, depending on your skill sets, the same way you do a PIA, the end user is going to want to have that. So if we know what the end investor wants, help your clients get that ready for them and just show them how it's done. It's easy.
And that helps them to be, I guess, the incoming purchaser to be, finance ready and deal ready. If you're gonna hand them the QS, and if you're gonna hand them the rental appraisals that even off the plan, because a lot of the time we're trying to get these our finance approvals by selling off the plan. If we can do that and make their life easy to buy off us, that's going to make our life easy getting the stock.
Absolutely. And there are some things that are so much cheaper while you're building. So we've had properties that we've taken over, not that we've built, but we've taken over, where there's air conditioning in the master bedroom, air conditioning in the living area, but no aircon in any of the other bedrooms, right? Or there could be a TV room or a multimedia room, and there's no aircon, and all of a sudden you're trying to get more air conditioning, and if it's ducted, forget it. You get splits in there. So sometimes it's like you said before, spend a little bit of extra money, and the overall sales price, the time in selling can be shortened for the sale term, but also increasing the sale price dramatically by going, what do these people want? And if you're selling it to an investor, but it really is owner-occupier quality, if that investor ever goes to buy it, to sell it, they've then got a larger market they can sell it to as well.
Yeah, and I'll look back round to that a little bit more, because I've seen the Mosaic property portfolio change over time. You touched on that. As property developers, we tend to have this mindset that we want to squeeze more onto the property. So that means if we're going to get more, dwellings, that means they have to be smaller in size to actually fit our yield calculations. But you guys have seen, the opposite take effect when you start to make, larger, better quality product and what you're calling, owner-occupier stock. That's actually getting much better rental yields and much better buy prices and much better capital gains in the longer term.
Oh, and Rob, some of the things that we've seen, because we've gone from, in the past, we've built small developments. The smallest is 9. We've built a house and land. We've built townhouses and we've also built large complexes as well. And you walk into some townhouses and they've got this little courtyard at the back with dying grass, but there's no way you can get a lawnmower down the back anyway.
Yeah.
So unless you take the lawnmower from the front door, down the hallway, through the kitchen, down a few steps, so then you go, well, why didn't I put fake grass here in the beginning? Right. So when you see as many properties as we do, you start understanding what people do and don't like.
I guess along that line, I guess maximizing the return is one thing, but where I've seen Mosaic extraordinarily successful is because you've had that ultimate purchaser in mind when you've sold your stock, they have then become repeat buyers.
Correct.
And so over time, you're not making one sale, you're making many, many, many sales. And that's where I've seen Mosaic, I guess, go gangbusters, is because you've actually been thinking about the quality of the product, not trying to squeeze maximum density in it, and it's made you guys go exponentially.
No, that is so true. And that's why we never buy a site that's got a DA already on it, because most DAs is to squeeze as many as you can on it and not really think about the end user. And the other thing that differentiates us is that we don't sell the management rights and the property management. So we retain all that. So we are in our buildings all the time. So if we're going to sell it and then don't care, you might go the other way. But exactly what you said, if you can get repeat buyers, they love the product that they're living in, they love the service that you've got. So if they're an investor, and if you're an investor, then try and get that investor to buy multiple times from you. If they're an owner occupier, what they normally do is then either A, buy investment property, like same quality but investment property from us, or they move into another property and then use the one that they've moved out of as investment.
So you touched on, I guess, property management rights there, George, and we haven't had this chat, but I'm hoping off the cuff you as a developer doing, I guess, when they start to scale, most of our guys in our network start small and they start to get to a point. At what point does the management rights actually start to become attractive to someone like yourselves or another property management team?
As in to buy or to sell?
Well, yeah. So, if somebody's building a 6-pack versus a 20-pack, at what point do the management rights actually start to become attractive to a property manager?
Look, well, with us, we see the management rights, so that's the caretaking, as our ability to make sure that the property that the residents, be it owner occupiers or tenants, have moved into, maintain the same level of quality as the day they've moved in. So we want to make sure that all the lawns are done, all the cleaning is done, there's no spider webs, the garages are clean, the pools are clean, the lifts are working, right? And when something is going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong at the worst time. So, and there's mechanical things involved. We've had garage doors that are stuck down, on a Thursday night before a Friday, Saturday, Sunday long weekend, right? And we'll get phone calls at 11 o'clock. So do you have a 24-hour call line where if something does go wrong, that people can do? So what most people don't realize with a body corporate is that we put in management rights to body corporate irrespective of how small the project is, because every project still needs cleaning, lawn looking after, rubbish removal, car parking issues. Visitor car parking is the biggest headache you're going to have. Mm-hmm. And also, without being disrespectful, some of the bin rooms, you need to make sure that our bin rooms are air conditioned and they've got nice fragrances there, because not everybody's got the same hygiene habits, right? And I'm not being rude, I'm just being honest. Right. So, but as an investor, what a lot of landlords don't realise is that even when the stage where they're maintaining their stock, if they've bought the property in a company name or a trust, unless they've signed a nominee form, their vote doesn't count. Or if they've got an unpaid levy, their vote still doesn't count. And these are things you normally learn in hindsight.
Yeah. Mate, we've covered quite a bit of ground. Is there anything that we've not touched on that you thought might be worthy of throwing out to the audience before we start taking questions?
Rob, I love this subject because I've been doing it for a long, long time. And it's one of those where we're trying to create more transparency in the business, right? Probably what I'd love to do is get an article out there about what questions you should ask your property manager before engaging their service. And fees is definitely one of them, but it's not the only one.
Mate, I'd be more than happy to, I guess, get that out to our community. We didn't pre-plan that, so if that, if anyone wants to, I guess, reach out either to myself or to yourself, I'm sure that we'll be able to provide that for them. But I'll take that as an action that you and I touch base, and we'll collect that. And if anyone reaches out, I'll be able to distribute that for us.
By all means, I'd love to help your audience.
Very good. Well, that said, mate, we've got a few questions that are coming through from our audience. Before I do, I'm just going to tell them about what's happening in and around our network at the moment. So just give me 2 secs. So for those of you who are new to our Sunday sessions, we cover a very different topic every single week. And so we've got a back catalogue of those on our YouTube channel. So if you're looking for, I guess, a whole bunch of things to go through, go and have a look at YouTube. Search for Property Developer Network, or follow that little short link there, propdev.info/YouTube, and you'll find all of that back catalogue. We also run 2 Facebook communities for those who aren't aware. One is called Property Developer Network, and that is a support community for anyone wanting assistance in the process. And you ask the question, and the community actually helps you through that. And then we've got another one called Development Site Deal Hub, where it's nothing but off-market transactions. So thousands of transactions that are happening there. People find sites and flip them for finder's fees, and you can buy them off-market, that sort of thing. Great place to find investors for your next project, etc. And for those of you who are interested, many people know that we do run a formal education program. We are preparing for an intake on that at the moment. So it's called Property Development Formula. If you just go to propdev.info/apply, and then we can send you all the details on that. That said, mate, I'm going to go and have a look at what questions we've got coming through from our guys at the moment. And hang on, it's just started talking to me. Lots of people saying, I guess, hello. So a big shout out to everybody. First question comes from John, I think. So no way to tell, so this is a little bit earlier in the conversation. So no way to tell them to leave best offer. I'm trying to interpret how he's worded that, mate. Give me 2 seconds while I work it out.
That's okay.
Around the apartment as a landlord, we have a pocket for the minimum 1 week. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. So because it was clearly in context with something we were saying at the time. So I think it's in regards to when they're transitioning from, I guess, one tenant to the other, you're going to be out of pocket for a minimum of 1 week in your rent by the time you're transitioning. For most property managers, I guess when tenants are transitioning. So he's trying to, I guess, ask a question in that, and I'm just not quite understanding his question. So John, if you are there, mate, if you could just reword that question, that'll make it a lot easier for me to actually pick up.
Can I just jump in though, Rob?
Absolutely.
So not only will they have the vacancy, they'll have the, normally a lot of property managers will charge a let fee. So when they're releasing a property to a new tenant, there's a let fee that can be 1 week plus GST. I know that there are some people around the country charging 2 weeks plus GST, and there's also advertising costs. So it's not just the vacancy, it's the let fee plus GST and the advertising cost plus GST, right? So all of a sudden, it can add up quite substantially. And if you add the vacancy in there, right? So you want to minimise that vacancy because you do still have that hard cost in there.
Yeah, and John's pointed out the fact that the tenants, when they're coming back and trying to determine whether or not they actually move out or not, they've got to consider all of the things like, well, and you touched on it before, the hassle factor of moving, right? There's, I have to take a day off from work in order to pack boxes. I need to go buy boxes. I need to pay for a removalist. I need to, by the time you actually do all of that, there's a transactional cost for them to actually move out.
Absolutely.
So,
So there are some tenants who have to move because they've lost their job or they've broken up with their partner or they're going to be transferred interstate or whatever the case is. But there are some tenants that will try it on, right? So they'll go, okay, and this is where you're going to be, it's all mathematics. There's nothing personal in this. So if you're trying to chase a rental figure, now you know what they're earning based on their application form that you've already got. So if they're trying to chase a rental figure lower, so sometimes we don't agree, but you don't want to kick someone out for a $10 a week. This, where you don't agree, because your costs as the landlord have got the vacancy, the advertising, and the let fee. You go, you know what? I'll happily keep them where they are at the price they want to go, even though it's going to be higher than what we said before, because it's mathematics. It's nothing more than mathematics.
Yeah, correct. And it's about finding the balance for how much it's going to cost you and the balance for how much it's going to cost them. And somewhere in the middle is the equilibrium to say, well, that's the rent that we can actually get at the
Absolutely.
moment.
And when you can prove to the tenant what else is being, so we want to show the landlord why we believe we're going to charge the next rent, but we've also do the same thing to the tenant and show the tenant what is currently leasing in that building or in that area that's comparable, so they know. So if you go to a tenant, I want $50 a week increase, but show them nothing. But if you go, here are 10 comparables that we've rented in the last 3 weeks, they go, okay, it's justified. So the more work your property manager does, the higher you're going to have a success rate.
Yeah. So there's a number of comments, I guess, saying great chat and excellent analysis and those sorts of things. We have another question from Bernard. And I think we've covered some of this, but happy to see if we can cover the ground again. So how do you actually choose a good property manager? What's the criteria that we're going to base that on?
All right. So it depends on the individual. So we get a lot of random shopping done, right, on us. And I can tell when someone's random shopping me because of the questions they ask. It all depends whether you do it by email, whether you do a Google search. I love speaking to my property managers before they engage us to see what sort of level of comfort they have with us, right? So you got to ultimately, you got a lot of money invested. It's the biggest investment you're going to have, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable with the property manager that you're choosing to look after hundreds and hundreds and millions of dollars worth of your asset. So I always say, get on the phone with them, right? Get on the phone with them. Are you comfortable? What's their experience? How many properties does a property manager manage, right? Is all the work done here, or is all the admin outsourced? Because you can outsource it and get it for $6 an hour, or do your actual team do it in-house, right? What software do we provide the landlord? So all of our trust account that we use, the landlord can actually dial into the back end and look at all of their cash flow, right? They can see when their bills are coming. So, and what service does the landlord get? So if we're getting your water rates, your land rates, your body corporate at the same time, and I can see that we've got $3,000 worth of bills, right? You're not going to get paid rent for the next 6 weeks. Do we say nothing? Or do we ring you and go, hey, Rob, by the way, do you know there's, so because you might be expecting your income and you miss out a mortgage payment because you're unaware that you've got $3,000 worth sitting in my trust account. So I think feel comfortable with your property manager, speak to them, interview them.
Yeah, absolutely. Coffee goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got lots of people asking for that list of questions, mate. So
okay.
for anyone out there that is interested in that, I guess that list of questions to ask your property manager, George touched on before, stick your contact details in the chat window, and I guess on Monday or Tuesday we'll come back to you with
I'll prepare it and I'll send it to you, Rob. Good
man, thank you, George. Appreciate that. So let me see if I can grab our next one. So here's another question. So is it better for long leases or short leases?
Yeah. So the definition of short, right, is 6 months. Well, I'm not talking about Airbnb. I'm not talking about, individual rooms. So for us, a definition of short is 6 months. So we've had some cases where the shortest lease we'll ever sign is 6 months. But we've had some 6-month leases go for 4 years because a tenant doesn't want to be locked in, right? So we don't normally sign greater than 2, right? But because circumstances change, you can sign a lease as long as you want, but there's always a break lease clause, right? Where the tenant's got to put it up for advertising. Well, you put up for advertising, they pay for the advertising costs, right? You've got to advertise it at the same price. But if we do sign a longer lease, we make sure that there's an increase in the middle. So on the anniversary of the lease, there's an increase.
Well, either based on CPI or based on market analysis, or how would you recommend doing that? Because I see that happen, I guess, in almost every commercial lease that's out there, but I don't see that typically in the residential market.
No, so we will work out, touched on what we said before, what would be the cost of losing that tenant? So by the time they move, vacancy, advertising, let fees, it could equate to $2,000. So you know automatically that's $40 a week, right? So you go, if we can keep this tenant on board for 2 years, and we want an increase of, and depending on where the property is and what the current market is doing, we can increase of $30 a week. So that's an extra $1,500 a year or $1,560, right? Plus you've got no loss of income. So, and you hit it before, these are residential leases, they're not commercial leases. So we can't treat them as such because the exit, now, and a lot of landlords, their circumstances might change, right? So if you get a 5-year lease and their circumstances changes, all of a sudden you're selling an investment property, you're not selling an owner-occupied property because you can't get that tenant out unless you pay them to get them out. Good fun.
Here's one I've just thought of, mate. It hasn't come from the crowd, it's come from me. I've seen Queensland recently introduce this legislation. I've seen Victoria recently introduce this legislation, and I see a trend around Australia. Pets in properties, good or bad thing?
Look, it's an open-ended question, Rob, and I've seen some pets that are beautiful, right? I've seen some kids, right, that are not as great as the pets. And I've seen some beautiful kids, and I've seen some ugly, some pets that are so. And we're getting now on a body corporate. We will at the moment here in Queensland, the landlord has still got the right to say no, right? Where that's going to change. Yes. Now, from a cash flow point of view, the amount of people that have got pets is substantial. So if you have an automatic no to pets, you are losing a large chunk of the market, right? So when you talk about dogs, are you talking about a little 5-kilo yap yap, or are you talking about a German Shepherd? Now, we've had some people that have approached us to have a Doberman in a 2-bedroom apartment. The answer is no, right? But I can see that there are some beautiful yap yaps. Some of these things cost $5,000-$6,000, right? The owners are spending $70-$80 a month on haircuts, right? And they are so well looked after. Would I have an issue putting those in my property? No, I wouldn't. But that's where you need a property manager to do the routine inspections on time to see what the quality of the property is like and how it's being maintained.
Well, and that's where I was going to go, mate. Firstly, you open your market much wider. Yep. Secondly, the ability to charge a little bit more because those people have got a limited selection of rental properties that can go to that will accept pets. So that's, I guess, attractive. And then I guess then it then becomes really super important from a property manager point of view, not to worry at the end whether or not the animal did any damage, but those routine inspections become super critical. Super critical because, and in Queensland at least, you can't charge a pet bond. So, which means that the amount of bond that you've got there has to cover both tenant damage and I guess the animal's damage. So I guess ongoing maintenance and keeping that, getting on top of that is super critical.
And through those inspections, Rob, we can tell whether we can smell urine, right? We can tell whether there's, food everywhere in the corner, right? But we also want to make sure that not only are we maintaining the property, or we know the property is being maintained during the tenancy, but upon exit, because these guys love their pets so much, they don't have an issue, saying that we are going to, and you write it in the lease, to get all the carpet shampooed upon exit, right? So would I say no to a pet? No. Would I say yes to every pet? No, I wouldn't.
So is that discrimination, mate?
But we look, it's a, yeah, there's, there are some beautiful pets out there, but I wouldn't say yes to every pet.
Yeah. Number of questions are starting to slow down, but we've got one here. How do you select your tenants?
Great conversation. So no tenant is ever given the keys. So we meet every tenant personally, right? So our leasing team works very, very close to the property management team. And you said it before, we can't discriminate, right? And we don't discriminate. So you look at, once you meet the tenant physically on site, we've got a lot of technology that we use that we gather information. So you do their affordability score. So you want to make sure they can afford it, and not just because they're on JobKeeper, right? So you make sure that they've got to afford it, and they've got to see a consistency of having payments. Now, we've got people for the first time, downsizers, that haven't rented ever, but they now want to rent for a 12-month, 2 years, and they're happy to pay 6 months, 12 months in advance, and they don't have any rental history. But if you're renting to a family, you want to see who obviously is the income earner. So everybody over the age of 18 has to be on the lease, right? If you're renting to couples or three mates, you want to make sure that you know all of their history, you do all of their background checks. So a lot of information's on TICA, TICA. That's the database that we use. You do reference checks to the previous property manager, right? And you'll also see how they treat you when you're on site and how you feel. The same way we're getting interviewed from landlords to hopefully be their property manager. We're also interviewing the tenants to see what they're like and are they suitable for that property or that whole complex as a whole.
Yeah. So mate, you mentioned TICA, and I guess this is a national audience, and TICA is a Queensland terminology. But there's going to be, I guess, a similar kind of concept everywhere else out
Absolutely.
there. So what is TICA, and why is that so important to, I guess, property managers?
Yeah, no, TICA and all of the similar databases around the country is a database that we pay heavily for, that if a tenant has been breached, they continuously in arrears, they leave the property in a non-satisfactory state, they abandon the property, right? We record all their details into this database. So it's a tenancy database. And then every new tenancy that we get, the first thing you do is you go into TICA and you put in Rob's name or my name and anyone who the tenants is to see whether they got any previous history. Now, if they've got history that the tenant says, oh, listen, it wasn't my fault, I thought my friend was paying the bill, but it's against my name, but you get a good feel about them. So there are occasions that you will ring the previous property manager to also get not just the normal reference check, but hey, listen, Rob says it wasn't his fault. What's the situation? So not everybody is bad that's on TICA, but you do take that information very seriously.
Yeah, both sides of the equation. Yeah.
You have to.
Now, I can speak from personal experience on this, and I'll give the backstory to. I bought my first house at 18, my first investment property at 21. I owned my first house at 24. So I had a lot of years of buy and hold. Then I moved interstate. And when I moved interstate, I didn't quite know where I wanted to live the first time. And I went, I'm just going to rent for 6 months and just get a feel of the area. So, a long-term owner-occupier, first-time renter, no rental history. I found it murder to actually try and become a tenant. So what kind of advice would you say for people, I guess, in that sort of circumstance?
Look, in this sort of circumstance, we find that the smarter tenants who are in that situation, instead of becoming part of the mainstream tenant pool, they'll actually ring us and talk to us and go, hey guys, I'm moving in state. I've just sold my house. Here's my bank statement. It says X hundreds of thousands in my bank statement, right? I actually don't know how to fill out a form, because especially a lot of the elderly ones don't, right? So it's about being humane, right? And COVID brought out the worst and the best in people. So here we were sitting exactly this time, first week of April last year. And I remember when the Prime Minister got up on stage about the rent moratorium, you couldn't kick people out. And we had tenants. They would ring us up and go, George, you can go and get lost. I'm not paying rent because ScoMo says you can't kick me out. Well, not exactly what he said. And ScoMo had no legislation authority anyway. And then we had the exact opposite situation where we had a landlord approach us and goes, George, my tenants are nurses. I know they're on the front line. I've actually got, I remember this as if it just happened today. I know they're on the front line. Can you please ring them up and give them 4 weeks rent free to say thank you for fighting this on our behalf? So what we approached, and we had about 15% of our tenancy database saying we're not paying rent. And then when you systematically, empathetically, and methodically went through each application, and they had to show you that they couldn't pay. Now, don't get me wrong, there was some genuine hurt, but there's also some fear mongering in there where they thought, yeah, the banks are going to give the landlord 6 months payment freeze, means I'm not going to pay. So we got down to less than 3% that needed payment plans, and it was rent deferment, not rent reduction, right? So we see everything, Rob, and I think the best thing is just, I'm old school. I still pick up the phone, rather than just rely on emails and SMS.
Absolutely. Well, mate, that appears to be the last of our questions. So I want to thank you very much, George, for your time and your candor in this conversation. For anyone else out there who is interested in that list of questions to actually ask your property manager, George will send that to me on Monday. And if you stick your contact details in here, we will follow up with you on Tuesday and make sure that we actually get that through. So, mate, personally, thank you very much for your time. And for everyone else out there, we'll see you all next time. So bye for now. See you guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.